Our 7 p.m. newscast, we are remembering 9/11 and speaking with those who have been affected by the attacks on that day in 2001. Tonight, we continue by bringing in Peter Abbott. Peter is a former member of the NYPD, New York City Police Department, starting as an officer, and he worked his way up to inspector. Peter was there the day of the attacks. He was running towards the towers as the second plane hit. He is also, Suncoast Connection, the former police chief of Sarasota Police Department. So, Peter, thank you so much. We're so glad that you are here, and you live to tell. You lived through this, and you're here to tell us your story tonight. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
So let's get right to it. It's a loaded question. Tell us what has stayed with you from that day after all these years. What do you remember? Tell us your story.
I remember vividly when the second plane hit and I saw the explosion out of both sides and the fireball reach up to the top of the second tower, the South Tower. That's something I can never forget. I remember emergency service units responding. I had run over from headquarters where my office was. It's about 4 blocks across town. And a bunch of guys that used to work in emergency service, we were helping them put on their gear. Tommy Langone and Rodney Gillis and John Coughlin, Paul Talty, and just at the time we just thought, unfortunately, it was a tragedy, but we were used to tragedies and go time. So when we put the gear on them, said be careful going into the buildings, we figured we'd eventually get it all under control, but unfortunately they all perished that day.
I am so sorry about that, and there aren't words for that, but you're here to tell the story, and I have to ask you, like you said, you're used to emergencies, you're used to responding, but when this happened, you said you saw a ball of fire. Do you remember being scared or just saying, I got to work now?
Well, it's when the first plane hit, I was in my office on the top floor of headquarters, and there was a big commotion on the police commissioner's side. I worked on the top floor there. So I ran over to see what was going on, and I saw them all pressed up against the glass, and I could see the smoke coming out of the building that had been struck. And I was trying to get some information, but it was a little sketchy. So I said, I'm just going to grab my stuff and go over there because it wasn't very far. So as I was going over there, again, maybe 15 minutes later, second plane hit. And then I knew, unfortunately, that wasn't an accident. And then we started, it was go time at that point. We started shutting down the bridges and tunnels. I got on the air and asked the central dispatcher to call the FAA and get control of every plane in the sky, get communication with them. If you've been in New York, so you know that Manhattan's surrounded by 3 airports, Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia. So you can imagine the amount of air traffic, and with 2 planes already hitting, it was pretty unnerving while we were doing all this.
Yeah, we're looking at the video right now. Just the smoke and everybody. I just remember everybody covered in white. That's an image for me. And this is not your routine. You're trained to be an officer, trained to respond, trained to deal with emergencies and stressful situations. But this was completely unprecedented. The conditions were unprecedented. It was mass confusion. Like you said, what's next? We got 3 airports here, people running towards the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, how professionally, how did you gather yourself to get in your mode to react to that?
Well, when everybody else is losing their composure, we had to keep ours because it's really important when you see people all around you in the street running. I was assigned to the first deputy commissioner's office, so I ended up, really, after that second plane hit, I ended up in the intersection of Vesey and Church, which is just on the east side of the complex. And we were there with the mayor and the police commissioner and the fire commissioner, who happened to be with us because he was given the briefing to the mayor. Otherwise, he probably would have been at the command post with the rest of the head of the fire department that ended up dying that day. We were with this, Barry Moon from the FBI and the Secret Service head, and we were trying to figure out how to get this all done, get the city safe, get it under control, find out if any more threats were going, and then move on from there. So things were moving in real time.
And you must, Peter, feel so lucky to be alive, but there's intense grief and sadness, and I can imagine some guilt too, because your brothers and sisters in service, nobody knew what was going to happen to anybody, and obviously the result was very tragic.
It's so true. I've said this before, that some people went left that day and some people went right that day, and that was the only difference between living and dying. And I was very fortunate twice during that day. I was inside 75 Barclay with the mayor and the police commissioner and the first deputy commissioner when the first building came down. And we were setting up a field command post. They were getting air cover. It sounds surreal, but we were getting air cover for the city of New York. We were shutting down air traffic. We were getting the National Guard in. There was a lot of things we were doing. And when the building came down, we couldn't get out the way we came in. So we ended up going downstairs, walking through a corridor, and then coming up the next block and getting out. And that's when the mayor and the police commissioner got taken out of what we call a hot zone. And but I still had some folks on my detail that I had to account for. So I went back in.
And it didn't end, 9/11, as tragic and horrific as it was, it didn't end for you on 9/11. There was September 12th, 13th, months and years after. So tell us about your work on Ground Zero after the day.
Well, I was assigned to the Situation Room of the Command and Control Center right after 9/11, the next day, actually. And we worked with the military, the FBI. We were trying to get a handle on everything because we were trying to see if the threat was still coming at us. But after every day, there would be thousands and thousands of firefighters and police officers working at Ground Zero trying to find survivors. Unfortunately, I believe only one came out in the first day, and that was it. Everybody else perished that was there. I remember, because that fire burned for 100 days, I remember being out there many, many times, and you could actually, it's not pleasant, but when people decompose, you can smell it. And when the rain comes and it's washing the ashes and the debris of what was the building and what were these people down into the gutter, and the smell of that, it's something I'll never forget.
You can never forget that, no.
When
I don't know what to say to that. I don't know what to say to that. I do know because you've been through so much, and we're very lucky to have you sharing this with us. What do you want people on the Suncoast to do to honor the people we lost and remember this day? Because you were in it, So what should we do?
I think, I remember how close the country came together back then. Everybody was an American. I've said this many times, when a firefighter or a police officer goes into a situation to rescue somebody, they don't ask if they're male or female, black or white, Jew or Gentile, Muslim, Indian, it doesn't matter. Democrat, Republican, they go in to save them. And I think people have to remember that. And I also think that people have to remember that we're all Americans. We'll always have some differences between us, but that's what makes us so good. And I wish that people would kind of grasp that and respect the folks that really run toward danger when everybody else is running away. I know, I don't want to get political. I know it's hard right now on a few fronts, but I would say from all the people I know, 99.9% of all the folks that are in law enforcement, firefighting, and in any profession are really good people. And occasionally you get some that aren't where you want them to be. But I think you got to remember that these folks signed up to put themselves between you and harm's way. And I think that's something to remember. And the fact that we're Americans, I think that's the most important thing. There's so much that binds us as opposed to divides us.
Well said. I admire you. Peter Abbott, thank you so much for joining us. Former NYPD there on 9/11, former Sarasota police chief. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing all of this. We appreciate you and appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Narissa.